There are many videos on YouTube about centering a div, but I assure you this one is unique and you're gonna love it. Back in 2022, I had an interview with CSS Tricks, and there I talked about writing a blog post explaining how to center an element without adding a wrapper around it. I thought it would be good to have this as a video too, so let's have fun centering elements. In this video, we're going to talk about two techniques. Even though the first one is a bit old and using display table might not seem very fancy, but I bet lots of developers still don't know about it, and it can be pretty useful sometimes, so I'm gonna show you how it works. Okay, let's work on this element. As you can see, it's taking all the available space here. We are going to bring it to the center horizontally. This technique is very simple. All you need to do is to give it a display of table and then make its margin in line auto. And there we go, our element is in the center. Very simple, right? This CSS snippet centers any element within the normal flow. So remember, no absolute or fixed positioning, and it only centers things horizontally. The drawback to this approach is that it's a bit old school, and there is a chance when people see your code don't understand it. So it's not good for maintenance unless you add a comment. Also soon it's going to be 2024, so there must be a better way, right? I will show you now. Alright, now let's jump to the second technique on how to center an element without using an extra wrapper. For centering elements, we need to make the auto margin work. So when does it work? It works when the browser knows the size of our element. Then it can divide the remaining space between the margins on both sides of our element. But most of the times, we want the size of our elements to be dynamic. We don't want to just give it a hard-coded value like 300 pixels or something like that. It would be very fragile to do so. Instead, we can use keywords like min content, max content, and fit content. These are auto-computed sizes that work in all the modern browsers now. So if I set the max width of my element to the max content keyword and then give it a margin in line of auto, now we have our element in the center again. Isn't that great? Very simple. Now let me explain these keywords using an analogy to make them easier to understand. So whenever you want to remember which one was which, you can think of my weird explanation. Okay, max content works like this spoiling parents who give you as much space as you want, no matter the consequences. So in this case that we have a lot of text, it just overflows and there is no text wrapping here. And then we have the mean content. Mean content is like mean parents. They give you the least space possible for you to just survive. And finally, we have the fit content value, and they are like perfect parents. They give you as much space as you need, as long as there is no negative consequences. So when they see you're pushing yourself off the edge, they make your text wrap like this. And do you remember the display table technique? It works pretty much like the fit content value. Going back to our example, you may ask, why did I use max width instead of width property itself? I recommend using max width property wherever possible. It's a more dynamic option and less fragile one compared to the width property itself. When you use max width, you're not forcing a width on your element. You're just setting a limit for its maximum. Therefore, overflow won't happen. And the content inside can wrap to multiple lines. And if you ever have to use width, use fit content instead of max content. This way you can avoid the overflow. Great, now let me show you some examples and use cases. Buttons are the best fit for these methods. Since they don't have long text, therefore you don't need to worry about giving them a fixed value for their maximum size. So I can just give it a display table and inline margin of auto, and we have it in the center. And I won't use this technique for the second button because it already has display flex to put the icon next to the text. So simply we're just gonna use the second technique for this button. And again, we have it in the center. Another great use case is to center a left aligned list like this one. If I give a text align center to my list, the text is gonna be centered. But I want the text to be left aligned, but the whole list come to the center. So I can use my both techniques here. I can go with display table. As you can see, it's just shrinks the width of my list. And then I can say, I want the margin in line to be auto. And there you go. Or I could just simply say max width, max content. And then again, margin in line auto. And there you go. Now take a look at this pagination here. Usually the best way to center this is just to use Flexbox, because we just gonna use Flexbox to put these items next to each other, right? But what if I give my pagination a border? And then I want this border to be just around my pagination, not to take the whole space here. Or imagine if we had a background for it. Don't worry about my awful design, it's just an example. So to center this, we usually add another wrapper and use another Flexbox or grid to make this center, right? But again, we can just use our technique with max width, max content, and then set the margin to auto. We couldn't use display table here because we were using display to be flex for its layout, right? So the modern way, the best way. Another cool use case for these techniques is just fast debugging or fast testing some UI changes and stuff like that. So imagine someone comes to you and say, hey, what if we bring this part of our footer to the center? So you can just select the element and come say display table and margin auto, and boom, it's gonna be in the center. So easy. But if it wasn't for this method, we had to add a wrapper or set a width of, I don't know how many numbers of pixels to make it exactly center here. So as you can see, it's a very fast way of testing something out. So we saw some use cases for these techniques, but there are cases that we cannot use them. For example, you cannot use them for the block access. Since the calculation of the height works in a different way, they won't work. If you want to center something both vertically and horizontally, you have to use something like Flexbox or Grid. Also, don't use these techniques when there is a lot of text involved, because we don't want our text to stretch too much and we want to have a maximum value to stop the stretching. So it's best to avoid this technique for something like that. So why do we need such a technique? Why don't we just add another wrapper to our element? Well, the first reason can be less DOM in our document. The less wrapper we create, the less DOM we have. Also, there can be a time when you don't have access to the parent of your component, or you don't have access to the HTML at all. For example, maybe you're using this CMS that it just gives you this ability to add customized style, but it doesn't allow you to alter the HTML. So in that case, you're just stuck with CSS, right? So this technique can help you out. And if you are using a utility class-based library like Tailwind, you can just throw two classes of table and MX auto to have your element in the center. Remember, there is no best way to center things in CSS, but the more techniques you learn, the easier it's going to be for you to find the best one for your needs. By the way, this is a very fresh channel, so your support and subscription would mean a lot. Thanks for watching.